Hello everybody, this is MRG Mapping, and this is the first episode really of my tutorial series on how to build a custom map from scratch. We're going to start off with an introduction to Giants Editor 8.2. This is meant to get your feet wet, introduce you to Giants Editor, kind of clear up the confusion and what am I working with, what do all these panels and windows do, uh, teach you how to move using the Giants Editor interface, um, and really clear up the I don't know, the mysticism of Giants Editor, because I know a lot of people find it intimidating to start out with. So we're gonna cover everything in this episode before we even start the tutorial. Well, we'll cover Giants Editor in this tutorial, and then the next one we'll take a look at the file, what a map file looks like, and then we'll actually start building stuff in the map. So, but we have to know the tools, how to use the tools first. So let's get started with that. Let's see if I can get this working here. There we go. Okay, so for prep work, you are going to need to make an account with the Giants Developer Network. You can go on their website and download Giants Editor version 8.2 once you make an account. You're going to need, something to unzip, a map file, because we're going to be taking a look at a map, and that's going to help us learn how to use the different mechanics in Giants Editor. You can use WinZip, WinRAR, 7-zip to do that. And of course a mod map to look at and practice on. I'm going to be using Mercer County, one of my maps, to show you guys how to do everything in Giants Editor and give you examples of some things. But so you don't have to use that, but feel free to go ahead and download that map. So that's what we're going to be using. So let's get started. Let's move this PowerPoint out of the way, off to the side, and let's boot up Giants Editor. Giants Editor. It may take a little bit for your computer to boot it up. I have a little bit higher end PC, so it doesn't take too long. Okay, so you're going to have this panel. You can check mark the box, show it start up if you don't want this to show up, but this will basically bring you to the Giants website. Where you can find more video tutorials and keyboard shortcuts and whatnot. Okay, so we start off and there's nothing here. So we need to actually open up a map before we can really discuss anything. But just a first glance look, pull this up here, just a first glance look at Giants Editor, you can see we have file, edit, create, view, scripts, window, this bar up here. You have an additional toolbar below here. You have all of these panels, which you can move around. I'll show you how to do that. And then in the center here is going to be your mod, whether it's a tractor or a map or whatever. Okay, so let's open up a map. So some of you get a little confused about how to even open up a map. So we're gonna try that. I'm gonna walk you through this. So I'm gonna pretend like I just downloaded FS19 Mercer County. Okay, I have that right here. So I am going to. Oh, this is the map, not the zip file, huh? Okay, let's use the zip file instead, because that's what you're actually gonna download. Okay. So it's FS19 Mercer County version 1 unzip. Okay? So that's where the WinRAR, WinZip comes in. Most of you who play with mods know what I'm talking about. So you're going to extract that. Actually, if we open it, you're going to see that there's three files in here. So let's just extract that to the desktop here. So that's going to take a little bit of time. For some of you it might be longer, for some of you it might be shorter. It really depends. And if it's a huge map, it's gonna take a while, or a huge mod. So let's let it unpack here. Okay, it's unpacked. Where did it end up? Okay, so I unpacked it to the desktop. You can unpack it in a file, whatever you feel comfortable with. I'm not sure where is this the Harvestor? Okay, so I think this is the 3 files that came out. Okay, we don't need the harvestor. I'm gonna throw that away. We don't need the trigger pictures. I'm gonna throw that away. We need the map. This is FS19 Mercer County version 1. That's the file that we need. We can put the zip folder over here. Now what I'm gonna do is I am going to put FS19 Mercer County. Actually, I'm just gonna keep it here, and we're gonna go back into Giants Editor. We're gonna go File. Now here's the tricky part. If it's a zipped file like we have on the desktop, oops, I accidentally exited out. Let me pull that back up. Like we have on the desktop, FS19 Mercer County version 1, and it'll look like this when it's zipped. We want to go to File, Open Mod. Now if you're just opening an i3D, you can go to Open and open the i3D. But we want to go to Open Mod because this will unzip and unzip that file, everything that's in that Mercer County file, and it will allow us to it'll create a working directory for us to work from. Okay, so I have it on the desktop, so I went to my desktop over here on Quick Access, Mercer County, and then create working directory. You know, it'll create it on the desktop, but you can change the path if you want, and click OK. So we're gonna sit here, and it's gonna unpack, and it's gonna take a little bit. Might take longer, might take shorter. Giants Editor kind of is a little bit labor intensive on your PC, so it depends on what you're working with. I had a kind of a lower end PC before this, and it didn't take that long, but you know, zipping files took a lot of time. So, but you know, it all depends on the size of the file and you know what's in that file. Okay, so sorry. So, it's unzipped and everything, and so we're opening this i3D, maps, mapde.i3D. Sometimes you have like a zip file that have multiple i3Ds in it, and you can just click this drop-down menu and click on the i3D. See, this is the map file, and I have a whole bunch of i3Ds in this file that I could open. But we want the map, so map Mercer County. Click OK. Again, another waiting game here while it opens. This is the, you know, sometimes I'll walk away for a half second to look at something on Reddit or something until it opens up. Okay. Excuse me for the cough. I have a little bit of a cold. So this is the map. And for the first thing I want to teach you guys is how to use or how to move around in the map. So the first thing we're going to do is have our mouse on the map screen. So I'm going to move this panel over. You just hover your mouse over the edge here. I'm going to get this will likely show up for you guys. This is the console panel. This shows a lot of errors and there are errors right here, among other things. I don't like to have this up when I'm mapping, so I click this little X right here to get that out of the way. But we can bring it back in the future. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so I moved the panels out of the way. Now, how do we move around? This is kind of the tricky part that you're going to have to get used to. But I can hold right click, and I can rotate the camera like this. Looking up, look down, holding right click. Okay. Now I want to move forward. So hold Alt, hold left Alt, that's where my thumb is right now. And your hand position is going to be helpful here. You know, having the right hand position in Giants Editor is going to help you work a little bit faster. So I always have my thumb on left Alt, and then if I need to use hotkeys, I can drop my pinky down to control and then use whatever hotkey I'm trying to use. So thumb on left Alt, and you can swipe, hold right, click, right mouse button, and swipe right to left. Swiping left, I'm zooming out. I'm swiping right, I'm zooming in. Swiping up, swiping down. Both of those do zoom. Okay? So you can hold Alt as well with your left and hold down left click and rotate the camera as well. So not holding Alt, right click. Holding Alt, left click. Okay? So I pretty much, when I'm moving around to get into position to look at something, I will just hold Alt down and alternate between right click and left click. So holding Alt, right click, rotate, move in, left click, rotate, right, move in, left click, rotate, right click, zoom in. So it's gonna be a little bit confusing at first, but it's gonna be like riding a bicycle. You're not even gonna notice it once you get the hand position down, once you get the alternating between right click and left click down. So it takes some practice. There's an interplay, but once you get everything down, it's gonna be super easy. You can also hold right click and click W. I'm holding down W right now and right click. So that helps you go a little bit slower. Now how we go faster is we hold shift. Sometimes it kind of slows down a little bit, so I need to lift my middle finger off of W and click it again. So this goes a lot faster. So I'm holding right click, W, and then shift. So right click, W, shift. Holding all those buttons down. Okay? Don't click shift a whole bunch of times because your computer will give you that, you clicked the shift button 7 times, you can't do that. That's the, you release the demon or something like that, whatever that error is. So, okay, so once you get that down, we're golden. The rest is kind of easy and not as wonky. So the movement, get that down first. Alright, let's see, what else do we have? Okay, let's start with the panels. Before clicking on any objects, we're going to look at all these different funky panels and what they do. Check, make sure the stream's still working. Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's check out all these funky little panels. Let's start with File. This is where you're going to save. This is you can reload the map. If you haven't saved, I suggest not reloading the map unless you need to revert it. This is where you can open mod, open. This is also where you can import and export files. Mainly use the export selection with files button. We have edit. So this is all of these are covered pretty much by hotkeys. So you're probably not gonna use this that much. So we got hotkeys for all of this, and it's gonna make it go a lot faster. Create. This is a little bit more important. So this is where we create our transform groups. I'll explain what that is in a second. This is where we can create lights, we can create a camera, create an audio source, and splining, which we're going to get into later. In primitives, so you can create a cube and a plane. And a navigation mesh. That'll be for your animals. But we'll get into a majority of the things that we're going to talk about in this tutorial. It's just an overview, and when we really get into actually creating an animal placeable, creating a light source so we can look at something, we can see where we're painting because sometimes it gets dark in the map, creating a camera that we can use to take a picture of a PDA. You're going to learn that later, so this is just a brief overview. Scripts. These are the scripts that are baked into Giants Editor. There are some scripts that I have added that I'm going to show you how to add into your Giants Editor program, and then there are scripts that are just baked in that are already a part of the program. I use this for field dimensions. I use this for creating my road spline, and getting field sizes and toggling render field areas so I can actually see where the fields are. When you have field dimensions set up. Window. This covers all of your panels. So remember we exited out of the console panel. That was the one below. You can click that and bring it back up, just like that. So now we have the console panel. I hate the console panel. I don't use it that much. But now that we're here, I can show you all the different panels. Because if you don't have it when you first download Giants Editor, you just come here and click on it and bring it up while we're going through this part of the tutorial. But before that, we're going to cover the toolbar. You can open up the toolbars down here. I have them all enabled, I believe. There's shortcuts to basically what's in file and what's let's see here. Yeah, these are all in the file drop down menu. So save i3D file, save i3D file as, import file. um, these four are what I use the most. This is the terrain sculpt mode. So this is gonna, raise and lower your terrain and smooth it out. This is the terrain detail texture paint mode. This is how you create, how you paint gravel roads if you want to paint gravel roads. The terrain info layer. Info layers are super important. They're how a lot of scripts run nowadays. You can use this. This is going to be for your farmlands mainly if you're not working with any special scripts, but it gets super useful once you start adding scripts like the tree splining script and field dimension script and seasons mask, all going to be governed by this. And then the terrain foliage paint mode, I use this probably second most. This is for all your foliage painting, your deco foliage, or if you want to paint corn down in a certain area, which we probably won't do. We'll keep our fields empty, but if you want to do that, you can use that. Okay, so let's get to the panels. This is probably the most important part. So again, like I said, you can adjust the panel width here. If you click right on the edge of the panel, you can adjust your panel heights by clicking in between these panels. This little space in between them, this little arrow will show. Okay, so the first one is the scene graph. The scene graph is basically everything, every object that's in your map and more. So this is where your camera's going to go. This is where the light for the sun is. This is where the terrain is. These are where your transform groups are going to go. So transform groups. Pull up my PowerPoint here. Make sure I'm staying on track. Yeah. So okay. So this is basically where everything's going, and is in the scene graph. And it's crucial to not be intimidated by this. These are just my farms, the trees, sell points, all of that is just going to show up in here. So don't be intimidated. Most maps, it looks like a mess, unless they're super organized, which I try to be, but even mine get to be a little bit of a mess. Okay, so let's start with a transform group. So you can create transform group right here. Create transform group. And then it shows up at the bottom of the list. And basically what a transform group is let's why don't we click on a barn? That might help me to show you what's a good barn to click on. Because I don't want to click on one with like a roof. That's gonna, or let's just click on this tank. Okay, so we're clicking on this tank, and basically transform groups are like is the object, but it has this XYZ arrow structure. This is how you move objects up and down, left and right, and place them on certain areas of the map. There's a quicker way of doing this, but basically what you're gonna do, let's do this really quick. We're gonna click on this tank, and we're gonna hover our mouse over the arrows. See how they're highlighted like that? You can click on that with left click, and you can just move them in a straight line. I'm gonna move it that way, in a straight line, okay? So you'll see these values on the right side changing. We'll get into how those attributes, how we're going to effectively use the attributes panel, but essentially, like, this is going to determine the XY coordinates of where this object is. You're going to be telling the map, hey, this is where this tank is located in this map, okay? And we can move it up and down with the Y arrow, okay? This transform group also allows us to rotate. So let's hover over this arc. You see this little arc here? We can rotate the object around in a circle by that, or we can click on this. Maybe you can barely see it, but this red arc right here, we can rotate it in this direction, okay, or rotate it in this direction, okay. So that's how you're going to play around with your objects. But we're going to be using the attribute panel. Basically, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be moving stuff with those arrows, but you're going to be using the attribute panel to like get them very precisely into the right position. So you're going to use these arrows for very generally where to put your objects. But even that, like, we're probably even not going to do that because we're going to learn a quicker way, a hotkey that's going to allow us to just drag this from across the map. Just click, drag it from across the map and put it where we want, and then use the attribute panel to precisely get this object rotated how we want, how to get it positioned, height-wise, how close we want to get it to a barn. We're going to use this as a fine-tuning tool. So those are transform groups. We can click on other barns. We'll click on this, and you can see this is my bale shed, and it's highlighted. So you can see on the left panel here, it's part the supports here, and the I don't even know what Quonset hut. Click on that on the left side. See where I'm clicking? So there's two little groups, two children underneath the parent group. Okay, so if I move this Quonset hut, the supports are not going to come with it, and we want the supports to come with it. So I just moved that. So here's our first hotkey, and you're going to be using this a ton. You're going to use Control Z. Control Z is the undo button. So if you need to undo an action, like let's say, go ahead and click on this hut, Quonset hut, under Farm 5, under Bale Shed, and we're going to move it. Okay? Then click Control Z. That undoes that action. Okay? We want the whole thing to move. So we're going to click on Bale Shed. Bale Shed covers both of these transform groups, the supports inside and the roof and foundation. Okay? So click on Bale Shed, and look, we can move the whole thing with supports included. Pretty easy, right? Pretty simple, straightforward. Most barns are like that. We'll turn around and click on this barn. This has like so many different sections to it. It's all wall sections. See, we're clicking on various places and we're highlighting wall sections, okay? So this is a modular barn. This is a barn that has tons of different pieces to it. And so it has a bunch of different objects, and each of these has a subgroup. So, you click on a wall and you click this plus arrow, or plus button, and you're going to open up and you see more objects and transform groups underneath of that. So these objects, they can be buried within multiple transform groups. So it's important to recognize that, and how moving something isn't as simple. You need to move everything underneath a transform group, then you need to click on the parent transform group, right? I hope that makes sense. So like, let's say I want to move everything in this group. I'm going to click on Barn 5 because I put everything in Farm 5. Because I put everything in Farm 5, okay? So look, that highlights everything in the transform group, Then I can move it, it's going to be a little laggy because that's a lot of objects to move. But that's basically how transform groups work. And you can create transform groups like we did before. We kind of jumped the gun. But you can create transform groups that when you create them, they're going to start at 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, rotation, everything, and they're going to be at the origin. And so what I'll do is I'll create a transform group called, let's say, Farm 5, like we just did. And then I will move that transform group here, down here. And then I will pile all my barns and whatever into Farm 5 so I know, where to locate them, and everything is organized. So there's multiple different uses of transform groups. Don't be intimidated. We're going to cover more. And once we start importing objects, it'll make a lot more sense. But that's just a brief overview of what's happening in the scene graph. Okay, so so we're gonna cover more later. Don't worry. Let's get into the terrain editing panel. this covers a lot of different things. This is going to cover your paintbrush, how you're brushing, all this dirt and gravel down, or how you're brushing all the grass down. This covers the foliage layer. Okay, yeah, that's the grass, but that's going to correlate to your paintbrush. Basically, it's going to say, well, let me show you first. It's easier to show you. Okay, so let's start with the brush. Let's click on the Terrain Detail Texture Paint Mode. That's the red pencil up here in the toolbar section. Okay, we clicked on it. Now we got a circle. This is our brush. This brush is going to be used for painting the grass, and it's also going to be used for painting down gravel and other textures. It's also going to be used for painting down the info layer for painting the seasons mask and stuff like that. So what matters is which one of these toolbar selections we have clicked on. So if we have terrain sculpt mode clicked on, and we want to increase the height of the terrain, we have to click on this first. This is going to change what you're painting, or what the paintbrush's function is. Okay? So let's start with changing the terrain height, which is really governed in this panel right here, the brush panel. So you can change your radius of your brush. Let's start with radius by using the mouse wheel. See, I'm going down on the mouse wheel, and this is up on the mouse wheel. Just scrolling, and you can see this number changing as I do that, the radius number. Now, usually, if you're painting a big, huge area, you can switch this to like 50, and now you got a huge radius, or you can switch it to 2000 if you want to paint the whole entire map. Let's start with 5. Okay, 5, and then you can left click down. Okay, so we have radius of 5. This is what it looks like. Opacity, hardness, and value. I have not heard a very good explanation of what opacity does. The Giants editor for dummies says that it's like when sculpting, the opacity is multiplied by the value setting. I don't know what that means. I don't know if I've never really messed with opacity. I've always kept it the same value as hardness and value. But hardness is gonna determine how your fall off on your brush. So if let's say you're raising up the terrain, and it looks really sharp on its edges, you can use hardness to smooth those out gradually. I'll show you how to do that instead of smoothing them out severely, so it really smooths out. So let's see. Okay, so value. That's going to determine your brush's strength. So if you want to add terrain height really quickly, then that's going to be determined by value. I kind of keep these all generally the same. If I'm being soft with the brush, I'll keep it between 0.2 and 0.5. If I want full on add a whole add height really quickly, I'll switch them all to 1. Again, I'm going to show you later how this works, but we'll do a little brief introduction to that right now. So let's just zoom in here. I'm going to have it all at 1, so I'm going to change all these values to 1. Okay. We got a radius of 5. Okay, so we can change our brush type, the shape of it. We can start off as round, or we can do square. Square I don't typically use, unless I'm, doing edges along a building or something like that. Let's stick to round for now, but you can explore that later. Okay, so this is how we key each button on our mouse. Left mouse button, middle mouse button, right mouse button. Okay? Currently, left mouse button is on add, but you can change it to smooth, subtract, replace, remove. Well, let's keep it as it is right now. This is typically how I have it set up. Add, smooth, subtract. Okay. You can have it however you want, but this is how I do it. So left mouse button is add. So let's left click. So see what that did? It made a little jagged hill in the middle of our road here. Let's move these panels over so you can see a little bit better. It made a little jagged hill. Okay? So now we have left mouse button, which is smooth. So let's hold left or hold middle mouse button. Sorry, hold the middle mouse button and move the brush around, and look, it's gone now. Basically, what the smoothing feature is trying to do is trying to average the height of the terrain out. So you know, it's trying to average. I just left clicked, by the way. It's trying to average this height with this height, right? And so when we move it around, it's just gonna, you know, it's gonna smooth out to what, you know, is around it. But now let's do that again. Let's click left click, just make a little lump there. Okay, now let's move these values back to 0.2. Now watch. It's smoothing it a lot slower. We can gradually click left mouse button. Now we have a nice smooth little mound. You can smooth it a little bit there. Now the mound is a lot smoother. See that? How it's not as jagged as it was before. Let's left click right here with values turned up to 1. See how it's the differences? See this edge? This is not natural. Hills don't look like this in real life. You know, so you want it to kind of look like this, right? Your terrain to look a little bit more natural. So that's what we're aiming for, but sometimes you want a jagged edge because, you know, maybe the terrain's going to overlap with a road that you have right next to it, so you just got to keep it jagged. But again, well, I'll show you an example of that later. So let's go back to our panel here. Excuse me. I need some water before we continue. What's our time at? Don't want this to be too long. Oh, 30 minutes. Jesus Christ. Okay. So left mouse button. Smooth. Oh, well, let's do right mouse button. That's subtract. Okay, so that's the opposite. Look at that. I'm just gonna, you know, let's click Control Z, Control Z. I'm gonna click right mouse button once. Okay. See how that left a little divot? I typically don't use subtract. I use the replace function, but I'm gonna show you that in a bit here. But again, you know, bring these values down to, you know, 0.2. And you can use these little sliders here to get them lower or where you want it. I'm gonna smooth it. Now it just looks like a smooth little crater. Okay. So that's subtract. I typically don't use it. You're gonna be using subtract for like deleting foliage. You're not gonna be using it for subtracting terrain because you're probably gonna use the replace button. So let's change left mouse button to replace. All right. So now it's toggled onto replace. This is our second hotkey. Our second hotkey that we're going to learn is Control R. Okay? So I'm going to show you here. Let's click, this is the replace number. It's going to basically like, so let's say this is 0 height, right? So 0 height at left mouse button replace, and I click the left mouse button, it's gonna go down, right? Now let's tune the look at how deep that is. That's like the bottom of the map, right? That's at 0. But we want, you know, let's say we have this little divot here. We want this to be the same height as the surrounding road. We don't want this little hole here. Okay? So we're gonna click Control. Now pay attention to what happens down here on the replace number. Okay, so on the terrain that you want the height to be, hit Control R. Look how that gave me 79.44. Okay, the values around this hole should be around that number. Control R, 79.367. Control R, 386. So they're all really close to each other, right? So they're all around the same height. So we're gonna click, hold down left mouse button, and we're going to smooth over that hole, and then we'll smooth around it a little bit. And look at that. This is basically where we started. It's smooth again. So that replace function is hugely important to making sure things are on the same level. That your road, or you have level land for a building, you know, leveling the land off for that button's hugely important. So we're going to be using that a lot. Not so much the add and subtract buttons, mainly replace. When it comes to that, that's when it comes to the terrain sculpting mode, replace and smooth. But let's switch it back to add. Okay, terrain layer painting. I don't use this. I don't think I use this at all. This is for, I believe, painting on certain terrains. So if I want to paint on, let's, oh wait, oh never mind, I do use this. Sorry, I apologize for that. Let's switch our paintbrushes to the red texture paint mode. Okay, so we're switching from the terrain elevation sculpting mode to the red paintbrush mode. Okay, so this is going to determine our texture layer, this little panel off to the side. This is going to determine like the gravel, what the gravel looks like, and this is going to determine what, you know, where your grass, the grass underneath your grass is going to look like. So let's just, for simplicity's sake, let's switch on rough dirt. Okay. Now we have the add button, or left mouse button keyed to add. Let's click the left mouse button. And that's going to add rough dirt. That's what the rough dirt texture is. I'll show you how to change these textures, but for now, let's just settle with what we got for the defaults. This is rough dirt. We can go to this little drop-down menu. I guess it's a drop-up menu. And we can go to grass. This is what I put underneath my grass. So let's left-click. So there, the grass texture. Pretty straightforward. You know, let's see. I don't use everything in here, but you can experiment with all the textures. This is gravel, you know. Only this gravel texture is different from this gravel texture, right? See how it's kind of different when I paint over the old gravel here. Paint over the old gravel and see how it looks different. So there are multiple gravel textures, and they're at different angles, you can see. But if I go to the gravel that's in all caps, this is a composite of all four of those textures. See, now this is the gravel that I actually used, and it's a composite of all those angles. So that's usually going to get you the nicest, and you can combine textures too later. I'll show you when we're editing ground textures, but yeah, that's what that looks like, and it's kind of a nicer, it looks nicer. Okay, so that's the terrain painting mode. That's really straightforward. Feel free to experiment all you want. We're going to switch to the foliage layer painting, and we're going to go to well, let's start out with terrain detail first. So let's walk over to our field here. Make sure you have this little leafy brush, this leafy icon selected. Okay. Everything that happens with that is going to be covered under foliage layer painting. So your foliage layer painting, what you're painting is going to be determined by this drop-down menu, and it's going to be determined by these foliage channels. So this is a field. I rarely change the foliage channels for that. So we'll keep this at 0, and we'll have our mouse unchanged up here. So I'm going to click subtract, so that's the right mouse button. And look, I just deleted it. And all that's left is the texture underneath, which is just the grass texture, right? So now I'm going to click left mouse button, that's add, and I'm going to add it back over top. So that's how you create these fields, right? You do not need to do this because the field dimension script will create the field for you. But I usually do this so I have the field in game, and then I just build the field dimension script to the field sizes. And the reason why is because when we get into doing the fields in GIMP, that's going to give you all the real sizes. So you're going to want your field dimension script to render the field areas according to what you painted. So this is how you paint fields. This isn't gonna, doing this alone is not gonna have crops in it or anything. It's just gonna be a field. Doing this alone is not gonna have, you know, the field number in it. That's another, that we need to explore that later. This is just the texture, the field that you can actually plow and so on. And also, as long as you have this painted down, the computer AI is going to, and Courseplay is going to measure the edge of this field, and that's, it's going to determine its course based off of that, right? So, I mean, you could just settle with this and you'd be fine. But most people don't want to settle. So that's the terrain detail. Now we can click like, let's click O2, right? Under terrain detail. And let's click down. Now this is a grass field. This isn't just the regular grass underneath. See, if we right click, you'll see that, how it's different. Let's left click and put it back. This is actually a grass field. So I use this when you know it's going to be a field that you're going to mow, right? So, and you want the AI to work with that, to be able to mow over it. Let's see, what else do we have? You can play around with these textures. I'm just going to do a brief overview. Let's do what's the 03? This is a fertilized texture. So this is fertilized. Normally what you're going to do anyway is just have a regular ground state. So unfertilized field like this, But if you want to start it out fertilized, that's how you get fertilized. What's 3-4? I don't know what that. Oh, that looks like manure. And these are actually going to determine the angle of your rows. Let's see. Can I get a so the sowing texture here? This is planted from left to right, right? So we can change the angle of that by like clicking 6. And I have multi-terrain angle, so it's just going to be slightly off. And the map I'm going to give you guys should have multi-terrain angle, but it changes the angle of the sowing texture. You're not going to be using this much, but explore what you can do with the terrain detail layer. Right? So, and if you want to delete fields from another map, go ahead and do it. Okay, so the rest is, we have our foliage, which is, so let's click on wheat, and let's see, layer state. Let's click like, the layer state's going to determine, whatever it's dead or alive, or it's ready to harvest, so let's just click ready to harvest 1. Okay, and paint it down with left click, and look at that. We have wheat in the field. I don't use these because, again, the field dimension script, once we're finished with it, is just going to plant the stuff in the field for us anyways. So you don't even need to do that. But what I do use is grass. Grass, and always green big. Don't use green small, green middle, because the grass is going to grow anyways in the game. So you might as well use green big, and this is like, like pasture grass, mowable grass. This is the mowable grass. And I kind of use it as like, it's the dirtier grass. There's a deco grass that I'm going to use, that I use for my farmyards, that you can use, and I'll show you that in a bit. But this is, let's paint this down with left click. This is the mowable grass that you can turn into bales. So you can paint down underneath of this. Let's go back to terrain detail. Underneath of this, like that grass texture, O2, and this is gonna be a field that's, in AI could try to mow around, with Courseplay or something like that. So that's mowable grass. Always use green big. There's really no point in using the others. So let's go down to the panel again, go to the Deco Foliage. Deco Foliage is all of our pretty little decorative weeds and nice looking mowed grass. I use this grass texture for my farmyards because it's nice and mowed. Most farmers keep their farmyards, the grass mowed, so I keep it looking nice. If you want mowable farmyard grass texture, then you're going to need to use this texture that we just put down. So Deco Foliage. I'll show you the pretty grass that I use. So that's grass dense. That's all the way at the bottom here. And some maps might have different foliage layers. They might have different deco foliage. Some might have winter deco foliage, like Midwest Horizons has that. But this is we're just going off of what I have here. So this, paint that down. That's nice looking grass. Let's see. Let's choose Rumex, small alive Rumex. I like using this around trees and bushes. Let's go to big alive. This is really nice to use around water. I like using this around water. Let's see here. You get kind of like prettier. No, that's not pretty. Hold on. This one. Yeah. So like this white flowery weed. When you learn how to get alfalfa in the map, maybe you'll want to paint down alfalfa in a field instead of that mobile grass. So yeah, that's what all of that is. Is there anything else that's worth mentioning? There's weeds down here, cotton. Oh, bushes. Bushes are important. This is how you paint down bushes. You don't need i3D bushes, but sometimes they look better. So those bushes would go up here in the scene graph, and they'd be movable and everything, and not paintable. But let's say we want paintable bushes. See, we got bushes along the road here. We can click on bush under foliage layer and do the layer state. And we can do state 1, state 2, state 3, state 4. You know, and these are, I believe, growth stages, if I'm not mistaken. So state 1, that's, you know, the smallest bush you can get. State 4, biggest one. I tend to use these, you know, not like I kind of paint them down like that by just clicking, you know, but not pulling them like this, because it usually doesn't look like that. Right? Okay. This video is running quite long. Okay, so let's hide these panels using the arrow button. Hide that, and we'll keep the brush open. Now we want info layer painting. Okay, so this is the blue paintbrush. So we did the ones with the arrows, we did the red pencil looking one, and we did the little plant. So now we're clicking on the blue one. And now everything's dark. Okay? Don't panic. This is going to cover your tip collisions. So if you don't want something to tip on the ground, you click right here and it gives you this little white texture. You can't tip there in the game now, right? Okay, let's erase that. Let's go to farmland IDs. Okay, look at that. They're all different colors. I'm going to teach you this later. But basically, these are, you're going to go through using this info channel layer down here, and you're going to go through and see how this layer value changes when I click different numbers. So this layer value is, you know, farm 5 or farmland 5. Okay? And so when I highlight farmland 5, remember we moved farm 5 over here? This is all part of farm 5. Okay, so you're going to use this to paint down what is buyable land, and that buyable land is also going to correlate to your placeable. So I have an animal placeable in here, and that's keyed to farmland 5, and this is farmland 5. Paint it down. Okay, I hope that makes sense. We'll do farmlands later, but that's, you know, general overview. Field dimensions. These are my field dimensions. Dimensions of all the fields, so that like the computer will plant down crops when you got this painted down. And it'll make your map come to life. The seasons mask. This is where snow doesn't fall. Snow is not allowed to fall on this layer, so all that white you see is where snow is not allowed to fall. You kind of had to be really meticulous with this one. Alright, we're not going to do noise and erosion, because I have not explored that personally enough to be able to explain it to you. We're going to jump over to the attributes panel. Wait, that was a long segment, the terrain editing panel, but it's used probably the most, that with scene graphs. So let's jump over to the attributes panel. So it's blank right now. So let's go back and let's click on our tank that we were playing around with before. Okay, now everything's highlighted. Or brought up. So this is going to give you the XYZ translation. Remember we were moving this thing back and forth before? It's going to give you the rotations. So remember we were rotating this as well. And it's going to give you the scale, right? So let's try putting all of these down to 0. See how it disappears? So where'd it go? It is over at 0. This is the 0. This is 0 for farm 5, I should say. If it was outside of that transform group, 0 would be like below the map over there. But we're gonna go over here. Let's see, where did it go? Oh, and it winded up in here. All right. So we're gonna, let's say, you know, we want to move this right here, and we'll use our arrow keys to move it down here, but we want to rotate it around, and we want to fine tune the rotation. Let's say we want it like 90 degrees rotated. That's going to rotate around the green arrow, your Y rotation. So that, let's set it back to 0. So these values are going to turn or move up and down based on how you're rotating. See how that number rotate X is moving up and down. I typically use this panel for rotations and scaling and fine-tuning where the object is. So I hope that I'll show you here in a second. So let's go to rotate Y. Some objects, when they're vertical like this, are actually rotating around the X-axis or around the Z-axis, but they're typically rotating, usually the object is rotating around the Y-axis, which is the green arrow again. Or the green arc, I should say, rotating around the green arrow. So let's rotate it 90 degrees. So that's facing away from us. Let's pretend like okay, so we want it the other way, so that's going to be negative 90 degrees, so opposite, right? So now the cap of the tank is facing this way, maybe like that's how you fill up the tank or how you want people to fill up the tank. Just to make it look like that. Let's say you want it, let's put it back to 0, you want it rotated opposite of 0. 180, ooh, 180. Okay, that's very basically what the rotations are going to do for you. I'm going to, let's say I want this like, I don't know, if this isn't the best example for showing off the fine-tuning tools in the translation part of this. So like getting like fences and walls super close to each other. Let's say we click on this wall here. I move this over. See that Z is moving? Okay, and I want it as close to, let's say I want this edge to be as close to that as possible. Let's see. So the number translate Z is moving, it looks like it's moving down towards 0 as we move it right. So I can't, move this any closer because I don't have as steady of hands, right? So, I can get it pretty close. Like, that's pretty darn close. But, if you don't want to monkey with that, just use this panel to get this closer. So it was at 0.8 before, so let's do 0.7. That might be overlapping. Let's do 0.8, and then we'll go down from 0.8. So let's do 0.799, right? That's the next step after 8. And it only does three numbers, by the way. You can change that, but, let's stick with 3 numbers. So, or decimal places, sorry. So let's do negative 7.99. Still not touching. Let's do 7.79. Okay. Still not touching. Let's do 7.8. Looks like 7.8 works for us. So let's keep it as that. At that. You're going to use this because, why is this important? This is important because when you overlap textures like with walls, you're going to get this flickering between the walls. Let's see if I can demonstrate that. See that flickering that you get as you rotate the camera? That's going to show up in game. You don't want things like that overlapping, so you're going to use this translation panel here to fine-tune so you can get the wall as close as possible so there's no gaps in between, but also so that it's not flickering, causing that flickering that you see right there. I hope you can see that. Okay, so let's go to scale. Let's scale this. This thing is scaled. Again, it's scaled along the XYZ axis. So if you want it taller, you're going to scale up the Y-axis. If you want it wider, you're probably going to scale X and Z up. Or sometimes if it's a barn or a rectangle, if it's round, you're definitely going to be scaling X and Z. But if it's like a barn, maybe you want to only scale the X-axis to make it longer or wider, So this is scaled to 2. I'm going to reduce all these numbers to 1. Okay, let's move it out from here so we can see it better. See how it's smaller? Now, when you scale something, scale it up, for instance, the textures tend to stretch, right? That's a giant tank. The textures tend to stretch And so a stretching texture can make it look very unrealistic. Like, let's say you have something with wood panels or wood siding on it, and you scale it up. The wood panels are gonna look huge, like there's huge 2x4s, right? Which is just not realistic. Um, so this can kind of stretch your textures out on your object. So kind of it's a matter of striking a fine balance. Um, Between making it bigger and having the textures look good. So after that we have visibility. This is a check mark box. You can click this and it will be invisible. You won't be able to see it, but you can still collide with this in game. It'll just be invisible, you know? So we generally want things visible. What I typically use in the visibility checkmark for is for cell points. So I don't want to delete them out of the Giants editor, and I want to keep their position in there, but that's not the actual cell point because that's going to be governed by the items XML. I can just click it and make it invisible, and there's no harm in doing that. So generally you want to have things visible, but maybe there's something that you do want invisible. I don't know what that would be, but yeah, that's what that does. So clip distance. Okay, so clip distance. At a certain distance, as I zoom out, this is going to disappear. Alright, so I'm going to... Oh, there it is. That's what clip distance is. That is the moment in which in-game you're going to be able to see that object. See how it's disappearing? Reappearing? So this must be, 200 whatever out, because it's keyed to 200, right? Yeah, so clip distance is 200. That's going to be affected also by the transform clip distance that it has. So if the transform group overall has 1,000 clip distance, it's going to scale it proportionally, right? So let's say we want to see this from across the map. Let's make it 10,000, all right? We can still see it, we can still see it, we can still see it, other things are disappearing, we can still see that tank. Oh, and that's the point. This is 10,000 out, right? Okay, so this is important because your game's performance can be affected by clip distance. If you have trees that are always able to be seen, that can affect game performance. So you might want to adjust clip performance down, or clip distance down, so that you can't see things from very far away. Or maybe you want it, maybe you have a high-end PC and you want it that way. Okay, so let's see, what else is important here? Oh, the rigid body, yeah. To make this thing so that it is collidable, that you can collide into it, you need to click rigid body. And you want it static. Now dynamic and kinematic, that's for stuff that actually moves. I don't mess with that stuff unless it is animated doors. We're going to mess with animated doors later, so don't worry about that at all. I have not explored LOD or joint, so I can't really explain that right now. But for now, rigid body is going to be important. If you have rigid body accidentally selected and it says static, for instance, for something that should be moving, you're going to run into problems. It's not going to move, There might be some parts that move, but the object's not going to move. That's a very rough overview of the attributes panel. Okay, how are we doing on time? Oh my gosh, we're at an hour? All right. Material editing. Let's see here, make sure our recording's going well. Okay. Let's see, material editing, changing textures. Okay. So if you don't have any of these panels, by the way, and obviously like you can move these panels around. If you click on the name attributes, you can move it over here if you want, move it wherever you want. I like it over here. You can move your scene graph wherever you want. This is my setup. It's however you like it. But let's go into material editing. Now this might not show up in the default, so you need to go to Window and go to Material Editing. Material editing is going to govern the textures on an object. Okay, let's stick with our tank here. Now, it is, oh, sorry, click on that. Material editing doesn't apply, the material doesn't apply to just basic transform groups. It applies to the object that's in the transform group. So this green poly tank, see how it's like a little cube, a blue cube over here in the scene graph? that's the actual object that is governed by that will govern the textures, or that the textures will correlate to, right? So we have textures that will be in the map folder in a textures file, and we want to tell this tank that we want a specific stainless steel texture that's located in the file. You can point to that via this. Okay, so sometimes there's multiple materials on the object. Sometimes there's multiple objects, and each of them have a different material. So like we can click on this barn, and this thing has multiple objects. See over here on the left side? We just clicked on the roof. You know, this is just the roof, and that's going to have a texture to itself. So each of the rafters, the walls, they're all going to have their own textures for that. But we're not going to bother with that. Let's stick with one object for now. So we got the stainless steel tank. How do we want to change, the support texture? Let's say we want to like change them to pink or something, brighter. And we don't want this black support underneath. Well, we can't actually click on the supports. We have to click on the whole thing, right? Now we don't get to just click on, the roof like that and just change that texture only. So we need to go to this drop-down menu, and we can click black 0.001. That's probably what the texture of the supports are calling for. Then we can go to this triple dot here after albedo map, and that's the black texture. It pulls up. You can click this triple dot. Actually, you can hover over this and see where the file path for the texture is. But you can click on that triple dot and click on the triple dot again, and let's say we want, okay, so the black is in this folder, so let's click, this has red 31, I'm just going to click red, okay, and then click the X button, exit out of that, and click off of it. Now you can see it's got a red texture on it. Actually, doesn't look too bad. It's got a red texture on it, okay. So maybe we want the tank to be red. So let's go back to stainless. That's probably for the stainless side, right? So that looks like a stainless brush texture. Let's change that one to, oh geez. We're in a whole different folder now, but there's still a red texture in here, luckily. We changed it to red. Now that looks ugly, right? Let's click Control Z. Control Z. And even the cap is red, which, maybe you don't like it that way. So they're tied. You can't change the texture of that cap, by the way, because it's going to be tied to the supports. So they're part of the same object and texture. So you're not going to be able to change the texture of that cap without changing the texture of the supports, if that makes sense. But this is an older object. So let's click on this barn. This is the barn roof. Wait, where's our normal? Maybe that's not a good choice. Oh, okay. So usually you have a diffuse texture, a specular, and a normal. Under here, I don't know why we're not. Our objects currently aren't getting it. Maybe the streets have that. No, it's just L. Okay. So your diffuse texture is going to be usually this first one is going to say diffuse, and then it's going to say it's going to be a specular map, and it's going to be a normal map. This says normal actually down here, and then an emissive map. Okay, so the diffuse is the base texture. Okay, usually the first one up here is going to be the base texture of your object. And I'm probably, talking out my ass here, because some people know a lot more about textures than I do, but I know how to change the textures and how to make them look good. Diffuse texture is going to be your base texture, right? Okay, so the specular texture is going to be the reflections and the dirt maps, usually, and it's also going to be where the custom shaders are located. So it's going to kind of like, it's how light reflects off the object. Then you're going to have a normal texture, which is going to create, bumps and creases in the texture. So I don't know if this one has that, but you can see that it has, let's see, if I click X to delete this texture off or remove this texture off of this shed, oh, it's not going to remove the ridges. It's oh, okay. So usually, like, for an object like this, the ridges, it's like jeepers. If it's like a it's like sheet metal siding, that looks kind of 3D, but it's not actually 3D sheet metal. You can click down here and take that off, and you'll just have like a plain, let's say we have a red barn, it'll just be plain red. It won't have that sheet metal look to it. Explore around with that. I know that's super confusing. Once we get to actually putting barns in our maps and making them the right texture color, I'm going to show you how to do all that. It's hard to find an example off the spot here. It's not a very good example, but changing textures can also affect. So changing this barn texture can also affect this barn's texture because they're the same shape and they're pulling from the same material ID or shape ID, material ID, sorry. So if I change the color of this barn, it might change the color of this barn. So if I want these to be two different colors, I might have to take this into a separate GE and change the material IDs and everything. I'm going to show you. That sounds super complicated, and I'm going to show you how to do that in the future. But changing one material can affect the material on another object. They can sometimes be keyed together, and you don't want that always. So I know the material editing is super confusing, but we'll get to it. Don't worry. Oh, the user attribute panel. Let's cover that really quickly, and then we'll kind of jump into our next tutorial on the exploring the map folder. Okay, so user attributes. This is going to govern mainly what you need to know as a map maker. This is going to govern your animated doors, your animated objects. It's going to govern your fields. This basically is giving the transform groups it's going to give them an attribute. So let's click on a door. Okay, we're going to click on, okay, so we clicked on this door. That's just the object of the door, right? There's nothing showing up in user attributes. It's just an object. But let's click on the parent door group. So this is garage door 8. You can click on any door, it'll probably have this. The parent group, however, is keyed and it has user attributes down here. This is going to relate to your animated objects. Okay, so it's given the attribute animated map object on create, right? And it's also going to have the file path. This is the file path to the script that tells how this door runs up, and folds up, or if it's like a hydro swing door, how it lifts up. So we're telling basically this object, go look in the animated objects XML, and that's what you're gonna do when we click the trigger. And that's another thing. You can see there's a little invisible box here. I'm gonna have a whole video on animated doors, but this little box is the trigger. That's the area in which you actually click down and open door. So you see, when you move close to an object, it shows up, click left button to open door. That's what that's going to govern. Okay? So that's, the very basic gist of Giants Editor. I know this was a long video. I apologize for that, but you really need to know this stuff before we start the tutorial. I mean, like, not super know it, but like you need to know the basics. And because it's going to help you when we're doing the tutorial. We're going to get into some complicated stuff here. That's really easy because I'm going to show you how easy it is. But once you know this stuff, it's going to go a lot faster. It's going to be a lot easier for you to know this stuff. So we're going to cover more of this stuff later, especially material editing and animated doors. You can just play around, edit this map, and when you're done editing it, let's say you moved this over and you changed the texture, right, and you just want this tank right here. Okay, you're going to click File, Save, and zip the whole file back up and get it into game. So and you're good. That's all you need to do. I'll show you how to zip the file and everything as well in the future. But all these little things that you learned in this episode are going to be brought back up. So don't panic. Don't be intimidated. We're going to keep working on this. Just practice a little bit before we move forward. But thank you for watching, and again, have patience and stay strong. I know it can be a little bit of a headache, but we're gonna learn more and more. Just trust me.